Yeah. All right, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural show of Citizen Sane. I am Guy Weddle, and I'm here with the illustrious, beautiful, crazy, insane Dr. Christie.
Hello, world. Woo!
Well, finally, huh? Here we
are.
Yeah,
absolutely. Years of procrastination, and we finally did it.
And today we have Frank C. Feschino, Jr. He is the author of the Braxton County Monster. This is a revised edition from 2012. The original, I guess, the publisher fucked up in 2004 or whatever, and I've been reading it, and it is phenomenal. We also have Alfred Lindbergh, who is here with us, and two of my favorite people, one of my most favorite researched cases. It has been, this isn't an armchair research type situation to where somebody goes out on the internet and they just go out and get stuff. Frank went out, was hands-on, walked the walk with the people, took the Air Force clippings, went, just really drilled down and spent, 20 years, Frank?
Yeah, closer to 21 now. But, yeah, I spent a lot of time in West Virginia. And I can add, too, that Mr. Lindbergh spent some time up in West Virginia with me as well. And he was actually one of the few researchers who actually was on the Bailey Fisher farm and went to the different sites where this occurred. So hats off to Al Lindbergh. He's one of the few that has stuck behind me on this whole case over the years.
Yeah, man. Al, how about you still around that meth midget bar down there?
we have to go there, do we? Come on, man.
We just, man, we got to.
No, I think that place burned down. Actually, there was some crazy bald-headed guy that just went crazy, from what I understand, and he torched the place. But apart from that, yeah, Joe Nichols was down there. Joe Nichols was down there. But at any rate, I really appreciate Frank's description of me. It's not entirely accurate. I'm certainly not a researcher, but I'll tell you what, I have been up there. I have talked to the people. I've been impressed with their sincerity and their courage and their general intelligence. I mean, they can't be written off as hillbillies when they tell a cogent story and are able to slap a decent sentence together. And like I say, I'm impressed with their sincerity, and it's a hell of a tale.
We actually talked about that the other day, didn't we? The fact that the people, sort of have these really good throwaway excuses, like, it was the 50s, they didn't know what they were looking at. They kind of refer to them as if they were almost of the same intellect as Cro-Magnon man. And it's really not the case, is it? I mean, in the 50s, we had all kinds of technology going on. And so, they're definitely if they're going to all describe the same thing in the same way, then there's no mistaking it. I would love to know what it was.
Well, the thing is, Frank's kind of put it together.
Yeah, so Frank, why don't you take us back from the beginning of why you got involved in the case and that sort of thing. I'm sure you've said this like 1,000 times, but if you could humor our audience.
I have some relatives that live in Braxton County, and at the time actually lived in Frametown, which is about 17 miles away from Flatwoods. And as we'll talk about this a little bit later, Frametown actually came into play during my research. There was another incident that happened the night after the Flatwoods Monster incident. But I was up there over 20 years ago, and I was visiting my cousin, and we had a death in the family. I ended up going back up to West Virginia, to Braxton County again. And early on, Guy, I started talking to some of the locals up there, and they would talk about the flying saucers and UFO sightings up there like the guys would talk about on Monday morning talking about the football scores. It was just very common. And I started getting phone calls from my cousin up in Braxton County and some of the other locals about all of these crop circles, rings that were appearing throughout Braxton County, and several of them were on my cousin's farm, right in the area of James Knoll, which was a key part of the Flatwoods Monster incident. But anyways, the stuff is still going on up there today as far as UFO sightings, crop circle rings, and I was actually put in touch with Colin Andrews years ago. I started documenting these crop circle rings. I lived in Connecticut at the time, and Colin came over from England, and we met in Connecticut and sat down for a couple hours. I gave him my video footage that I had taken to the farm and soil samples, different things pieces that he could use for his research. And during the early part of that research, it would just fascinated me seeing this stuff and listening to the stories that the locals were telling me. It was kind of kept inside the community. They didn't talk outside of that community too much about what was going on there. And during that point, within about the first year that I started going into Braxton County, that's when I found out about the Braxton County Monster. Somebody told me through a newspaper article, actually in the Braxton Democrat. And I went into town with my cousin. We were actually on the way going back out of state. And I said, well, let's stop by. It's not that far away. And it was only just a few minutes up the road. And we pulled into the town. And bordering to the right-hand side of the road, there's a gigantic wooden sign, "Welcome to Flatwoods, home of the Green Monster." And I went into the town, tried talking to a couple people. They were kind of standoffish about it. Not too much happened. Then when I got back home to Connecticut, I started looking into this story just out of curiosity. And over the next few months, I started realizing through all the newspaper articles that I was able to find, all the old UFO books and magazines. I was going to libraries all over the state, that this story had really turned into a joke over the years, and there was not two stories in any book that were alike. All the stories were different. I would read one book, and it said, Kathleen made a primary witness, and there was 2 kids, there was 5 kids, there was 12 kids, there was 4 kids, and I'm like, this story is crazy. And then when I saw what this monster looked like, I actually thought it was a joke. That's the old picture that you see of the monster wearing the KKK hood, this big black hood coming to a point. He's wearing a dress with arms and claws, with bulging eyes, with this big round head, basically similar to a monk's outfit. And this thing was floating. And that right there, to me, as far as I was concerned, that was kind of ridiculous. Well, I started going back.
It turned me off right off the bat, I can tell you. Not to interrupt, Frank, but it just totally turned me off. A Forrest Nixie with a big round pumpkin head wearing a Sweet 16 skirt. Now, come on. I mean, who can believe that? But please continue.
And this story, these different stories that I was reading about, it's like, how come this story is so botched up? Later on, I came to find out that this was one of the biggest news stories in the world in 1952. And I was thinking to myself, how could a story of this magnitude get this screwed up? Something happened here. So I started going into the town and talking to different people, and I was put in touch with the primary witness, Kathleen May. And I spoke to her on the phone quite a few times, and she started telling me a different story from what I was reading in the books. And what actually happened with this ridiculous drawing is that a couple of the witnesses actually went on a nationwide television show a week after the incident. It was called We the People. And the witnesses sat down with the sketch artist, and they were giving their descriptions to the artist. And this was right before the show. He did this pencil drawing on a poster board of what this monster, it was actually his interpretation. I can't blame the artist 100% because the witnesses had never seen anything like this in their lives. This thing was completely out of this world. And they're trying to describe what this thing looked like, and the artist, through his interpretation, drew this ridiculous picture of a monster wearing a dress. Yeah. I started working with Kathleen May, and she told me a different story. And she gave me the description. Being an illustrator, I was able to basically do police-style renderings, like sitting down with the witnesses.
And that was, too, the described as what Frank Feschino ended up painting was described from the very beginning. It never was a Forrest Nixie with a pumpkin head and a Sweet 16 skirt. It's what Frank drew.
Right, and what happened from that point, working with Kathleen, I ended up talking to her son, Freddie May, and I conversed on the phone with Freddie several times. I met with him, and Freddie actually took me up to the spot where this whole event occurred. And it was really cool to be able to go through with an actual witness. Freddie May actually saw the craft fly over the school playground that night. He ran up to the house. To his house. Kathleen was his mom. He was with his brother and a bunch of neighborhood kids. There was a bunch of dogs there. They all went up onto the farm. Freddie actually walked me step by step by step by step from beginning to end, and then back to the house after the encounter occurred. So I was able to get an exact feeling for what actually happened that night. And the farm since then has been fixed up into a dude ranch. It doesn't look anything like it did when I started going up there 20 years ago. And I have video footage of all of my eyewitness interviews. Then as I would go up there throughout the years, I would walk through with my camera, walk through the whole mile stretch and go to the different points. So I have video footage of what this farm actually looked like. Back then, it hadn't changed much since then.
Yeah, is everybody appreciating the significance of video footage of the key witnesses? And I'll tell you, now that is astonishing. And anybody who thinks they can whack it out in one place, it's in 2 or 3 places, folks. So it can't go away. Frank's got that forever.
Yeah, it's like, to be honest with you, when I first heard of this case years ago, I saw the Pumpkinhead rendering and all that stuff, and I just wrote it off.
Me
I
too.
didn't actually take this case serious until, I started looking at Frank's work.
Well, the good thing with Freddie May is I was able to walk through, and I got a feeling really good for what had happened there, and I understood it a lot better. And I was actually videotaping this step by step. And then I sat down with Freddie. Freddie was a few feet away from this whole, from the incident that had unfolded. Kathleen May was with her other son, Edison. We call him Eddie. And a couple of the other boys that were up there, and an adult, Gene Lemon. This thing came right out, which actually was a machine. It was like a metallic, it was like a hovercraft, like a portable spacesuit. And Freddie saw it from a few feet back. So when I was working with Kathleen, I had an up-close and personal description of what this monster, we're going to call it a monster for namesake, what the Flatwoods Monster looked like up close. She told me it came to within about 14 feet of her, which is pretty close. Freddie was set back down the path a few feet. He saw the whole scene unfold in front of him. So by being an artist, I was able to sit down and establish my illustrations. And we started out with thumbnail sketches. And actually in the book I have one of the original thumbnail sketches. I sat down with Freddie, and I would hand a pencil to him, and he did a sketch, and he says, well, Frank, you're better at this. It looked like this, this, and that. And before you know it, we had this working drawing. And I'm like, this looks absolutely nothing like what the original thing looked like. What Kathleen May was trying to describe to the sketch artist, the lower portion of it, and this is a very big misconception, was the draped cloth lower torso of the body. Mrs. May had never seen anything like this, and we're going to call it. It was a craft, basically, a hovercraft. The lower portion of it was flared out. Freddie told me it was about 4 feet wide, and it had pipes. And as I was sitting there, I remember him putting his arm out in front of him, and he said, Frank, those pipes that went around the lower torso were about as thick as my arm, similar to a fireman's hose. And he held his arm out. He said they went all around the lower portion of it. This thing was hovering, If you look at the original drawing close, the one thing that the artist did get correct was he put in a drop cast shadow, which was his simulation of it hovering. So this kind of added the mystery to the whole thing. Why is this ridiculous-looking monster in a dress with arms and claws floating? Why is it floating above the ground? When I sat down with Kathleen and Freddie, and later on I actually met Eddie May, and I met Ronald Shaver, and I talked to Neil Nunley, who was another primary witness right up front. He came within a few feet of the monster. The reason there was a drop cast shadow drawn in there is because this thing was a hovercraft, and it was propelling itself, and it was hovering off the ground. The sulfur smell and the gas that was in the area was coming from the exhaust of these pipes. This thing was a machine that was hovering. So you could see how, if you actually look at the illustrations that I was able to come up with from the descriptions of the witnesses instead of this half-assed drawing that was done in minutes right before the TV show, and they turned it around on this national television show and bang, put it in front of the camera. The music got loud and they played all this creepy music, and everybody just kind of looked at each other and said, what's this? But when you take the time and you sit down with the witnesses like I did, I was able to come up with the actual closer likeness to what this thing looked like. And as far as the big pointed cloth hood that was over its head, Kathleen and Freddie told me it was actually an outer helmet, and it was black, and it came to a point. The head was not a head made of flesh. It was actually an inner helmet. And Freddie likened the whole scenario to this as like looking at a fighter pilot sitting inside the cockpit. You're looking down over the canopy. This thing basically, the upper portion of it was like a cockpit. He said that it had what looked like a sheet of glass, some type of protective barrier or shield in front of it. Mrs. May said that the head was actually would like rotate where the collar was. In the original drawing, it showed like a little V-neck, almost like a little tie, and the head was actually turning. And this was actually like a spacesuit. And the upper portion in the drawing made it look like a tunic top. It was basically flat aluminum gray metal, and the whole thing was a little bit narrow at the top where the shoulders were, and then it flared out like a booster rocket. As far as the arms and the claws, those scary protrusions that were coming out, Kathleen and Freddie told me they looked like antenna coming off of the plane of the shoulders. And in the original descriptions of the monster that Kathleen May had given that was in the press the first couple days, the original stories, she said they look like little hands, which they were a combination of like small little antennas. When we sat down, I drew these sketches. And what they did is they took these hands, they put long arms on them, they turned it into a monster. So what you have here is actually a nearly 12-foot tall, metallic-like hovercraft. They were able to establish its height by the tree limb that it was under. It was hovering next to a white oak tree that was over 100 feet tall. When Mrs. May flashed the flashlight onto this craft, it lit up from the inside. Gene Lemon, who was standing nearby, actually flashed his light shortly after. It was about dusk, and the thing lit up from the inside. Kathleen May said it glowed from the inside.
And everybody needs to remember that, too. In addition to lighting up like a freaking Christmas tree, people had flashlights on this thing. And this is important to remember when we start talking about barn owls later on.
Yeah.
And
with big scary arms.
One thing I was talking about with Freddie, and this was a good likeness. It's like looking at your car at night when you turn it on and your dashboard lights come out and you could see the glow from within the car. That's what he compared it to. It actually lit up from the inside. And the fable tale about it was shooting laser beams and shooting beams of light from its eyes, it's purely science fiction. What the witnesses told me is when this thing lit up from the inside, it glowed, and the light was forced out of the eye openings. They weren't eyes. The witnesses distinctly told me they looked like portholes. This was a helmet. There was something inside of here. And where these big eyes were, the openings, because this lit up from the inside, it was a machine. It was basically like a cockpit. When the inside of this lit up, the light forced out of the eye openings. They were weak beams of light that shot out. They weren't laser beams. So there we have the myth of the monster, and how one illustration has botched up the history books for all of these years.
Yeah, that's all it takes. I mean, did it look damaged at all or anything, or?
Pardon?
Did it look damaged at all, or?
Well, Mrs. May told me in one of my interviews, Guy, she said when she came up into the area, the smoke, there was like this smoke and sulfur mist, and it was actually rolling down the hill area, and it was coming up from ahead of them to the left. As they came around this little swag and this dirt path, and it was a dirt path that's cut up into the woods, she heard noises that sounded like frying bacon. And I said, Kathleen, what do you mean by frying bacon? She says, well, when you have a bunch of grease and oil in a frying pan and it's crackling and it's sizzling, she said it sounded like something crackling and sizzling. And she said, in addition, she heard this noise that sounded like a low, thumping, rhythmic beat. And she said it sounded like a piece of stretched canvas, like a drum, if you had dropped a coin onto it, thud, thud. And she says that was rhythmic. And she heard this noise, and as they got closer to where this oak tree was, and that's when they cast the flashlights into that area, that's when the thing lit up from the inside. Well, as it was moving towards them, it was splattering oil and shooting this, we're going to say, it was like an oily substance. And this oily substance splattered throughout the whole area, and it hit the front of Mrs. May's uniform. She was a beautician, and they had uniforms back in the day, and this oil completely splattered the whole front of her. The farm was covered in the oil, so it does look like this thing was damaged. It was leaking. I don't think this thing was supposed to be splattering this substance out all over the place. And it seemed to be hot. Something was frying up from the sounds of what Mrs. May was talking about. This thing
and then on the other hand, that gas or whatever it was could be just the kind of thing that you might cast off trying to keep the gomers away,
Could have been.
Well, when you said that they were shining the torches on it and it lit up from the inside.
Right.
Right, so you're saying that the light actually penetrated through the exterior of this thing?
No. Flashlights were on the figure, and the figure itself was lighting up like a Christmas tree.
Right, okay. So
it lit up. And
yeah.
I specifically asked Kathleen, I said, so it reacted to you because this thing was set off to the left. It was at dusk time. It was up against the woods. It was behind this tree. They couldn't get a clear shot of it. They did not use the flashlights at this point because they were not going up there looking for a monster. They were going to look about 100 yards away on top of the mountaintop where the kids had seen it land. So they're looking straight ahead. They're not looking over to their left. This thing completely surprised them. Kathleen May said...
Yeah, they want to save their batteries. Is why they're holding off on their flashlight.
Yeah.
Exactly, Alfred.
And when you know an area, you're not really fearful, are you? So, I walk about in the dark quite a lot when, So,
yeah, and they've been there before. It was no big deal to them.
Yeah, I've done a lot of time walking around Rendlesham Forest on a night, and your torch is off most of the time. So, people would maybe sort of think that why would you go into the woods without a torch? Well, if you're familiar with an area, then you wouldn't, would you? You'd just be confident just to go off and, do whatever. But, yeah.
So this thing was actually in a dormant state, and they saw the glowing. It was like a low glow from the inside, and they thought it was it was like a dull light. They thought it was something up in a tree, an animal. Gene Lemon, who was standing near her, he thought it was a possum. You know, they're looking 12 feet up in the air. What the hell is going to be 12 feet tall with eyes up in the air? And that's when they hit it. And I said, Kathleen, did this thing react to you? And she says, absolutely, because when they hit it with the flash beam lights, it reacted, and that's when it lit up, lifted up, and hovered in front of them. This thing was basically hiding up there. And they weren't expecting to see something like that. They're looking straight ahead, like 100 yards to where the thing touched down. This thing completely surprised them.
Yeah.
And they were able to gauge the height because there was this tree limb from that coming off the tree that was 12 feet in the air, about 12 and a half feet. And this thing, when it lifted up and started hovering, just about cleared it. So when the investigators went up there in the following days, they went up there and they said that this is where it was seen. I interviewed Colonel Dale Levitt. He was United States Army in World War II, and he was actually called up to the crash site. He received a call from Washington, and he went up there with about 60 troops. When I went up onto the site with Colonel Levitt and did an interview with him, he told me he distinctly remembered that tree limb they measured was about 12 foot high in the air, and we were standing on the path, and as we got away to the right-hand side of the path, furthest away from the tree, he told me, Frank, we can reach up and we could grab the tip of that tree because it sloped down. He said, so whatever was there came from under the 12-foot point near the tree, came towards the witnesses, and then it moved back away in the other direction and went into the field where the craft was.
And Lieutenant Colonel Dale Levitt, I point out to everybody, is a bona fide World War II hero, decorated hero, with an outstanding reputation in the area.
Yes.
Everyone, after everyone saw that monster and it was all over, I mean, did they all go check their shorts?
Well, Mrs. May told me she was so scared when she saw it. What happened, Guy, is there was actually two fences, and there was a big steel gate, metal steel gate, and that was what separated the farm from the first pasture. The second pasture was the sloping gully. And when they walked inside, you know, it was like a big horse cattle fence. And when they opened that up, they all crossed inside onto the property of the farm. And as they were walking up the dirt path, there was a second fence, but it wasn't a swinging gate. It was actually, Mrs. May said there were two posts, and the posts are actually still there. And they would put slats of wood and nail them from post to post. And the fence was about 3.5 feet high, something like that, about 3.5, 4 feet. Mrs. May said she was so scared when she saw this, it came so close to her, she hurdled it in one shot. On the way up, they climbed over it. Her and the kids climbed over it. On the way back, she says, Frank, we were so goddamn scared, I hurdled that in one shot with a dress on.
Wow.
I can completely relate to that, actually. I had a UFO encounter in Wales, and the craft...
Oh, did we lose her?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I guess she was going to talk about something, some Rendlesham experience or something?
Yeah, something she saw. She'll get back in.
But anyways, that was Mrs. May was trying to explain how scared she was. The other kids climbed over the fence. When they got back down to the beginning of where the trail began, Guy, they all climbed over. They climbed through. They were so scared they just barely remembered how they got back over and down the hill and back to the house.
Can you guys hear me now?
I got you.
Yeah, we got you, girl.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say that the craft that I saw was pulsing a dull grey white light and emitting this mist. But when I actually ran for it, I thought that I'd travelled about 200 yards in 3 bionic woman kind of leaps, that fear will give you a height.
Yeah.
Yeah,
raw fear will give you the technology.
I was running and I couldn't see. I was the blind panic thing. I've actually had that. The only thing that I did see was my foot hitting the floor twice, and then I was in the house and I thought I'd done it in 3 giant leaps. Yeah. So, go on, sorry. Carry on
woman
now.
music going. Going in your head, bionic woman music.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Running in slow motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't get out there fast enough. It was like being hit by a truck, honestly.
So, I think everybody has a good idea of the wheres and whats and the why-fors of this crazy monster, out there in the middle, the flat, dead center middle of West Virginia. What was this thing?
Well, when I started researching this particular case here, everything I could get my hands on. I spent years researching. I was going to libraries all over West Virginia. I started expanding outside of the Braxton County Monster area. There was a lot of weekly papers up there. I got everything I could get my hands on. I started looking into some of the early research materials of Gray Barker, Ivan Sanderson, and pioneer UFO researcher Donald Kehoe, former Marine. And I started looking over some of their notes and piecing some stuff together. Then what hit me and sent me off into a different direction, Alfred, is when I started finding out the original Flatwoods Monster story didn't hit the news wires until Monday the 15th. The story happened on Friday the 12th of 52. The first article of the Flatwoods Monster actually appeared on the 14th in the Charleston Daily Mail. And it was Ailey Stewart Jr. who gave the information to the Charleston newspapers. Well, what happened, Guy, is when I started looking into the monster stuff, I started looking at the following morning newspapers. There was no mention of the monster yet because the story hadn't broke yet. But there was articles up and down the East Coast of the United States, and nobody had ever pieced it together, of flying saucers, UFOs, rockets, fireballs, meteors seen up and down the coast. Then I was able to get the Project Blue Book microfilm reel for the same day, September 12th. I started putting together all the locations where these objects were seen, and the story was a lot bigger than just what happened in Flatwoods. I started going into the different regional newspapers of where these sightings were said to have occurred, and I started buying maps and plotting the points. And in the end, I ended up finding out all these different states. It just wasn't West Virginia. I found out there was 21 hours of sustained UFO sightings over 9 East Coast states. They were over Delaware, Maryland, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. And then there was a sighting in California, which is in the new book, some new information, all within a couple-hour time period. So I started pulling out all the Project Blue Book information. I found out Blue Book didn't list Delaware, Ohio, or Tennessee. So I started contacting newspapers and asking them, calling them up around these different states, different regions, and once I found out where one was seen in what area, I would pull the map out and I would call the other local libraries surrounding that area. And before you know it, after several years, I have 102 locations in 9 East Coast states where these UFOs were seen. I work with different people with military backgrounds, and we were able to figure out the flight paths by using the times of these plotted points, what directions, the headings, everything. We put this whole thing together, and we recreated the scenario of what actually happened that night. You're talking about 15 years of work. This didn't happen overnight. It took me over 5 years just to decipher and pull the Project Blue Book documents together, because the process that they were reproduced back in the day, they actually would copy the documents, they would block them out, the masters got locked away, and until the point in time when they were actually photographed to be put on the microfilm, they were sitting around for years, millions of pages of documents, and what happens to the old ink? It starts fading. So by the time they were microfilmed, the ink started fading. Being an illustrator, and I was trained in calligraphy courses at Paier Art School, I was able to sit down and re-ink and go back over all the eyewitness testimonies. That took years just for the one day. And I would put up gigantic blow-ups of a page, like an eyewitness testimony, and you just walk by it.
Yeah, just so you could see what the letter was, right? Just so you could see what the letter was. Yeah.
Yeah, because these people were writing all this handwritten stuff. They were tentative observers questionnaires. What that means, if you saw a UFO, you would contact the Air Force. They would send you this questionnaire back. You would fill it in and send it back to them. But what happened by the time the Air Force got around to copying and photographing this stuff from microfilm, they started fading. So you have these half-assed documents that you can barely read. So because of the digital age, I was able to contrast and go back and forth and figure out and blow these documents up where the letters were gigantic, and I was able to figure out what was going on. And that is a good chunk of the information I actually used was from the government.
Yeah, everybody needs to understand too, Frank, that you're in a situation here where you have 102 data points that singularly all by themselves mean absolutely nothing. I mean, you've got Fred and Ethel. Hey, Ethel, get over here and look at this. But he reports it to somebody. He is able to give something a time stamp, a date stamp, and a direction that an object is traveling, right? And when you start getting all those things all put together, they point in specific directions. Am I correct in that, Frank?
That's absolutely what happened, Alfred. And this didn't happen overnight. I was buying small local maps, regional maps, and before you know it, I'm like, holy cow, there's more sightings in this area. And I'm piecing together all of these maps, and in the end, and you can see it on my website, flatwoodsmonster.com. On my homepage, you can click on the master map. You will see the gigantic map. It's the size of a wall that I actually used as the primary piece of recreating what happened that night, and it was quite scary. The Flatwoods Monster incident was basically, in a nutshell, a search and rescue operation. I've had military people stand in front of that map and their jaws hit the ground. And one of the original fellows who actually helped me with this, with a military background, he stood in front of that map, and it looked just like 102 bullet holes. And he actually helped me put together and figure out, and he said, Frank, you don't have any idea what you have here. And I said, tell me.
Dun, 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 cue that music. Yeah.
And I said, I have somewhat of an idea. He says, yeah, but look at the flight paths where they're going. And he pulled up one of my big drafting rulers, and we were standing looking in front of this thing, and he says, here, put it here and put it here and put it here. And before you know it, he's starting to tell me all this stuff, and he's like, holy cow, do you realize what happened that night? And he started talking, and Alfred, it fell right into place. And we were able to establish there was 4 damaged objects that were flying over the United States that night. And 3 of these objects actually came over the eastern seaboard. And by plotting all of these points, we were able to establish that the first object that came over the mid-Atlantic part of the United States flew southwest towards Tennessee, and it flew 100 miles through the no-fly zone. It was actually gunning and going towards Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The second UFO that came in over the coast went in the other direction, and it flew northwest towards Ohio, and it flew towards Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That was a target. The third object that came directly down the middle and threaded a needle and flew over Washington, D.C. The New York Times reported it on September 13th. Remember I said the following papers, the newspaper articles were talking about all these different things flying around the United States? It flew over and went over the Capitol and was called the Flame over Washington. When it passed over Washington, D.C., there was a dozen other UFOs that formed an aerial perimeter around it and dropped down out of the sky. It was seen, these objects were seen by thousands of people over the Virginia, Maryland, and Washington area. They just dropped out of the sky, surrounded this damaged object that passed over Washington, basically like they were protecting, like in football, the runner. They put a barricade around them, they protected them, and they were seen moving west. They ascended back up into the sky. This UFO that was damaged, called the Flame over Washington, flew about 200 miles west. It was seen by an airplane over Virginia, and it was seen over several points going into West Virginia. When it hit northern Braxton County on a western trajectory, it turned and headed south and flew towards Flatwoods. So what we have here is 3 damaged crafts coming in. When the object passed over Washington, D.C. safely and was not intercepted and taken out, the other 2 UFOs redirected, the one that was heading towards Oak Ridge and the one headed towards Wright Pat. We were able to establish the times. The minute that passed over safe, the other 2 turned and went in the opposite directions, and they landed. They were damaged too. So what we have here is 3 damaged objects over the mid-Atlantic. One came in from the Florida direction, and I was able to plot its points, and the majority of information was right in Project Blue Book. Nobody had taken the time to go through the documents, re-ink them, figure out. I was actually pulling my hair out for years trying to figure what happened. And
yeah, now you say damaged. You know, we have damaged some kind of aircraft that is damaged, which essentially is written off officially as one meteor lasting 5 or 6 seconds, which actually never really occurred, trying to justify like 21 and a half hours of continuous sighting. Isn't that right, Frank?
Right, and this whole chunk took place here within an hour of what I just described, within an hour. But there was stuff going on all day, before this and after this.
Well, what were witnesses describing when they've seen it, when it was airborne? What were the descriptions? You said it was the fireball. Is that what it looked like? Did it have some kind of like flames coming out of the bottom of it? I've been sort of puzzling over what kind of technology it might have been. So I know they were messing around with anti-gravitics at the time, but it wasn't necessarily that, was it? So what did witnesses actually describe seeing as it was airborne?
The main object, the Flatwoods Monster craft, was about 32 feet long. It was shaped like an egg, almost like a football.
Right.
Okay, or a rugby ball. It was an ovoid, and no appendages whatsoever. There were also crafts seen that night that were round. There was all giant round objects. Then there was another object that was described as round with a flat side, like if you set it down, if it was a ball, it would roll. This thing was flat on the bottom side. Then there was several other objects that were huge cigar-shaped objects that were seen flying over the area. And when I started to be an artist, I started drawing sketches of these things and started coloring them in. And then the house started to look like a flying saucer museum because I was doing full-blown paintings, and I was tagging them with Post-its. This one was seen here. This one was seen there. This couldn't have been the same one because it was headed this way and this was headed. So, like I said, this took years to figure out. Then we have an object that was shaped like a top. It was top-shaped, and this thing was gigantic. There was another sighting of a typical flying saucer over that area. Then there was another flying saucer. These things were gigantic, and they were all following All Roads Lead to Flatwoods.
Yeah, Frank, I think what Sasha's getting at, too, is that we say damaged craft, and so these things were making noises. There was molten stuff dripping off of them. They were dropping parts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was pieces falling off of them. They were sputtering, making noises. They were exploding, sparks coming off of them. I could give you a couple examples.
Yeah, please.
The thing was variously reported to have made hissing sounds, to have backed up and started over. This thing made putt-putt noises. It had sparkles around it. It was exploding. It was landing. What these things, when they came in, the one differential between, and actually there was 25 UFOs that night. Well, we're going to cut to the chase. I was able to establish there was 25 different UFOs seen over that 21-and-a-half-hour period, and there was a gigantic mothership that was sighted over the coast near Delaware, where witnesses that described it as the size of a dirigible or a Goodyear blimp.
Yeah.
This thing was gigantic, and it was hovering at a low level. During the Cold War, that's not too cool to have stuff the size of a dirigible hovering under 5,000-foot level under radar. At that point, we were anticipating the Soviet Union to bomb us. So,
and was it picked up on radar?
No, it wasn't.
Huh.
They were flying. Back then, our radar was only capable of picking objects from.
Yeah, this is key.
Above.
This is key. Yeah, key point here.
Yeah, 5,000 feet and above. Under the 5,000 foot, they were flying under radar. Here's another description. I'm going to give a one. It appeared to be a very bright light, and it looked as though little pieces fell from it, and it fell right into South Hills. These things had smoke coming off of them, and they were making.
So obviously some fuel source, and then it must have been a proper mechanical thing with the oil and all the probably hydraulic oils, etc.
Yeah, from the monster craft, from the spacesuit. And the ones that appeared to be damaged were actually puddle jumping, and they were following the courses of rivers. They were flying over rivers and crashing on nearby banks. They were flying over roads because they were damaged. They were seen going up and down. They weren't consistent on a flat plane. These things were barely clearing the treetops. One of the witnesses up there, and Alfred actually knows, she's passed away now, Margaret Kleiss, who was the mayor of Flatwoods for several years. She took me up to a point on her property a few years ago, and she said, Frank, look up over there at that tree line. She said, years ago when I was a kid, it took several years. That Flatwood ship came in on flames, and the pieces were falling off of it. It was so low, it burned the tops of the trees there, and it took years for that section to grow, have new growth, and come back up. So whatever these objects were, they came and damaged. You want to take over a key point, Alfred? What happened 6 weeks before? At the release of Colonel Montz, the Air Force?
Right. Well, the thing is, taking it all the way back, it's the situation is that it's right before the Flatwood thing was happening at all. There was the biggest flap in United States history. It was called the Summer of Saucers. June, July, and August of 1952. And this is the situation, and you've seen some of the more famous photographs of, they weren't landing on the White House lawn, but I'll tell you what, they were penetrating airspace and flying right over it, right? Yeah. So Harry Truman, I figure, decides, hey, I want one of these things. It might be kind of cool to have. And so here's the deal, guys. There's a pretty way to say this, but essentially he ordered our military to shoot UFOs down. The orders were shoot them down if they don't follow directions to land. But that's really kind of superfluous and really kind of even stupid to say, don't you think? You know, like UFOs are going to talk back. No. The orders were to shoot UFOs down. And so you got the summer saucers. You've got the very recently dispatched, very newly minted orders to shoot UFOs down. And the very next thing we have is Flatwoods.
Right.
But don't you think it's interesting that 2 years later, that document that I sent you the other day was, which is the protocol for UFO incidents in America and overseas, was actually created 2 years after. So in 1952, they're given the order to shoot them down, but by 1954, they had a full protocol and several teams who all had different, responsibilities for any incident, and they all reported back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I think that's, quite interesting anyway.
Well, I understand that there was a hue and a cry from the civilian community that found out about this. The head of the
Rocket Society.
Rocket Society.
And Robert Barnsworth.
Robert Barnsworth, thank you. And I understand too that Albert Einstein also indicated that this is probably not one of the best things that we could, endeavor to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a public outcry about this whole thing. And they said,
talking
Barnsworth.
about Wright-Patterson earlier, you were talking about a UFO heading that way. Was that to intercept fighters or to protect the damaged ship, or what do you think? What do you think?
By basically, yeah, that's a good point. By basically retracing this whole thing and the way it was explained to me, and it makes sense, especially after I saw everything laid out in front of me. All of my work was put together. They were putting the heat on. This was a threat. The first one moved down towards Oak Ridge National Laboratory, top secret security installation. Nobody's supposed to go to that area. If you ever tried flying through there, you get your ass blown right out of the air. This thing flew straight down, gunning towards it. The second one, it's like it's a fight. They put the pressure here. Put the pressure here. You're going to fall with us. The third one that came in was the most damaged object of them all. The Flatwoods ship was really messed up. And it was flying at treetop level going over parts of Washington, Virginia. The thing was nearly crashing. And when it cleared over the Washington area, the other two immediately redirected away. And I was able to, if you look on my master map, you could follow the flight path trajectories of these things. When they turned away, they started following the airport beacons and working their way back out of the United States. The Flatwoods ship touched down at the geographical center of the state. This thing was, it wasn't an accident that all of this stuff was going on. They put the heat on. It was a fight. Who had big balls, and we're going to go after you. Here comes our third craft. If you're going to fool with us, we're going to show you what it is to fool. All right, we know where Oak Ridge is and where Wright-Patterson is. And they put the heat on the government.
It's seemingly a military blocking action. So then what do we have, ladies and gentlemen, in the final analysis but actual war with extraterrestrials? I mean, it's completely nuts. Undeclared war with extraterrestrials that I don't think we won that war by any means.
Yeah, I think there's been so much of that type of stuff that's been going on that's not documented, and maybe not now, but especially during the Cold War, because of our hostility and that sort of thing. I can very well see that.
Yeah, that's true. But then you have guys like Edward Ruppelt, the titular head of Project Blue Book, and he wrote about our jets involving themselves with what he called himself lurid duels of death with flying saucers. That's pretty astonishing, isn't it?
It was in his book for all those years, and everybody overlooked it.
That's an arrogance I can't get my head around.
Yeah, Frank found that was the only one to find that, astonishing Stanton Friedman, astonishing me, who'd read the book too and just glossed completely over it. It's kind of like he was writing little bits of truth in there, and almost kind of like a code, because it could be that he was under some pressure to toe a party line, with regard to information.
Yeah, his exact quote was, "There have been other and more lurid duels of death," and that was in his 1956 book, Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. And that led us into a whole other direction in the Shoot 'em Down book, when we found out how many military pilots had vanished and disappeared over a 6-year period between 1951 and 1956. It's mind-blowing. I actually have another book on the back burner, and this book covers a 10-year period. And what I did is I went full-blown. I actually did complete chapter case studies. This wasn't going on with all these disappearing pilots crashing under unknown circumstances. It was also going on in the UK as well. And I dug hardcore into that. So this stuff was going on in the UK and the United States, and I make cross-references. And this is a book that will be coming out soon. And this is one of my favorites. This part here, this stuff wasn't going on just here. It was going on in Britain too. Freaky crash accidents. A lot of them were British pilots as well as American pilots stationed in the UK. But that's a whole other story. What we're getting at here is there was confrontations that were going back then. And a lot of people have brought up the question, well, in 1952, how were we able to shoot at flying saucers with bullets? Well, in 1952, at the time of the Flatwoods incident, we actually had, the American military had 3 fighter jets that were armed with rockets. We had the United States Air Force F-86D, which was the Sabre Dog. We have the Air Force F-94C Starfire and the Navy's F-7U-3 Cutlass. And they were all armed with what were called Mighty Mouse rockets. They were 2.75-inch rockets. They had a maximum range of 6,500 yards and an effective range of 3.5 miles, and they traveled at 2,500 feet per second. So we went basically overnight from bullets to rockets, and Alfred may want to explain, because he actually flew attack helicopters that carried these.
Yeah, the quick and dirty of this is if you add the speed of the aircraft to these rockets are delivering a punch at coming right up real close to twice the speed of sound with a 10-pound warhead of high explosive. Now they're UFOs, okay? So we're not supposed to be able to shoot them down. But all I'm saying is, if you don't have some kind of countermeasure, that 10 pounds of high explosive arriving at twice the speed of sound is going to complicate your physics. Know what I'm saying?
Especially if you have a couple hundred of them flying around the air, they're going to be hard to get out.
Evade.
Of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole point. So we did have advanced weapons.
Well, I mean, we'd just got of a war. I mean, we didn't have just pea shooters. We didn't fight the Germans with spitballs. So I find that quite a puzzling reason for dismissing anything like that, because we've been kicking the crap out of everybody all over the place for years with all things, haven't we? And all the stuff that Hitler was working on, and we had some crazy kind of technology going on, and they weren't afraid to use it either, were they? So I can go with all that.
Well, that's the one thing about this case that really kind of is upsetting the purists, so to speak, is that it is so extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's right up your nose. I mean, it's very difficult to write off as ultra-terrestrial or chrono-terrestrial or intra-terrestrial or dimensional or whatever we can come up with these days. That really, I have to tell you that it's a big effort to push away something uncomfortable to consider away from you, I think, so you can consider it more safely if you call it an ultra-terrestrial or an intra-dimensional or, you know, it's actually it's the same thing with regard to UFOs and UAPs. You know, you got your unidentified flying object, and then you have your unidentified aerial phenomena, which really doesn't have to be anything at all. You know, but the UFO, on the other hand, the UFO it's an object. It is there in the existential. You know, it is there in the corporeal world.
Well, I've noticed that through all the documents that I've been reading, the terminology, obviously, it develops all the time. They have changed the acronyms every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And more recently, they've been referred to as unknown structured craft. So it's the USC now, you know. So,
UFO is a dirty word.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, Frank, you know, what about other countries at this time? Did they have the same philosophies that United States did, like Russia and the UK and you know, some of these others? Were they shoot first, ask questions later, or did they have different philosophies that you know of?
Well, in the UK, they were chasing them and shooting at them as well. There was a big problem going on in the early 50s in Britain, and they basically had to go after them attitude as well. They weren't taking crap from these UFOs, and there's a lot of great documented cases in Britain where there was UFO pursuits, and they were going after them too. And there was quite a few American-based Air Force installations in the UK, and the Sabre jets were going after them as well. This stuff was going on all over the world. During the Korean War, they were the American and Allied pilots were chasing flying saucers over Korea, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So it wasn't basically just solely the United States that was doing it. There were quite a few sightings in '52 in the United States. 17 years that Blue Book was in existence. The height of '52 was during that summer. And overall, there was 1,501 reports and 303 unknowns. In June, July, August, and September, there was 1,134 reports and 111 unknowns. So it seemed that the hub of stuff was going on over here, but it wasn't exclusive.
Well, it's interesting, actually, because, you know, like I stated earlier about the document that I sent to Alfred with the protocol for UFO incidents, which was created in 1954. Menworth Hill listening base, which it is now, it's a NSA station. It's only a few miles up the road from me. And that actually opened in 1954. So, you know, there's a kind of little timeline there going on into the into why and where they've started, you know, especially with Menworth Hill, because they've, you know, the NSA have been, they were taken to court. There was a court case, wasn't there, where it was proven that they have been monitoring the UFO situation, even though most of it was blacked out. The fact that it even exists is evidence in itself. So the timeline's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
1954, that document comes out at the same time as Menworth Hill opens, so they really got the shit together by then, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
As far as monitoring this sort of situation, anyway. So sorry to interrupt.
Well, yeah.
Well, no, you're not interrupting. Hell, it's your show.
No, I don't. I'm going to kind of change the directions because I have a habit of doing that.
Yeah, everybody kind of had their hands full. I mean, I'm actually on a Cold War kick right now, where I've been just kind of studying everything that happened between like 45 and 60, you know. And, man, the amount of stuff that was going on just between us and Russia, just, you know, trying to one-up each other and trying to not, you know, blow up the world was pretty intense in itself. But then you throw in UFOs into the mix, you know, invading our airspace. We don't know what the hell they are. I can understand Truman's philosophy to blow them the hell out of the sky if they're not going to, if they are just going to show up in our airspace. I mean, that was some pretty intense intense times. I remember in the 70s as a little kid, that's all we used to talk about when we were little, fighting the Russians.
Yeah, but what is interesting about that is that in 1977, America sold Russia a 40-ton mega magnet, and that's the same year that they started the Woodpecker Project. So there's something not quite right about that, So I'm not convinced about all this Russia and America being completely at loggerheads. I kind of think that half of it was a facade.
You might be right.
Yeah.
We have certainly, made enemies for stupider reasons.
Mm. But then if you've got a threat like that, and it's an external one that you know nothing about, then maybe on some level you're going to have to collaborate with the enemy, because, they are the only other force that is a sort of compatible level with you. Everybody else is not that superpower, so there's only the two. So if they're the most kind of powerful entities on the planet, then they're the ones that are going to try and, at least...
Yeah, it may have been the thing, too, that brought us back from the brink.
Yeah, definitely. I could imagine once we realized it wasn't the Russians, and once Russia realized it wasn't us, that there was some sort of communication going on, that we were no longer on top of the food chain, and there was something that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and MacArthur in Addresses to West Point is talking about how the next big battle is not even going to be on this planet at all.
Yeah, a lot of people say that though, but I mean it's a logical assumption to make, isn't it? The way that we behave, we can't even be nice to our neighbours, never mind anybody else from anywhere else,
Yeah, but that's what's so enchanting about the ETH aspect of the Flatwoods Monster thing, is that it points to some kind of alternative energy, alternative communication, alternative medicine, actually I think better, an improvement of the quality of life. That's really the only reason I'm interested in UFOs at all, is because I can sense that there is that beyond getting an understanding of them.
Yeah.
And inevitably, what we have here after this discussion we've had for over an hour is the points of what the Air Force's official word of what they called all of this mess of all of these sightings that were going on. And what basically the bottom line was, I found in a Project Blue Book 10073 record card, and the comments section stated the West Virginia monster, so-called, actually the object was the well-known Washington area meteor of 12 September landing near Flatwoods, West Virginia. Well, the well-known Washington area meteor was actually the Flatwoods Monster craft that flew on a western flight path over D.C. and flew 200 miles plus into Flatwoods. And the conclusion was it was astronomical. And then the Air Force said that it was a fireball meteor. And it had a duration of 5 to 6 seconds, and its actual velocity, now get this, was estimated at 27 miles per second. That's how fast a meteor would go. But in reality, when I sat down with Stanton Friedman, we went over the distance between Washington, D.C. and Flatwoods. We were able to establish this thing actually took 25 minutes, not 5 to 6 seconds. It actually had a flight path of, a duration of about 25 minutes by the time it passed over Washington and then finally landed.
But they used the meteor excuse for Rendlesham as well, didn't they? I mean, this is an event that went on for 3 nights, and they said it was a meteor that come in. It's ridiculous.
Well, that's what they always say. It's like, why even bother asking them?
Yeah, and it's really crazy too with regard to that map that Frank keeps alluding to. Those 102 points, if you saw them as they're laid out, and just with their explanation and times and dates and all of this or times rather, and all of this and that, you'd think, wow, man, that's 10 years. That's 10 years of but no, it's not 10 years. It's not a year. It's not a month. It's 21 and a half hours, and the majority of that is in an hour and a half. So it's really difficult to get your mind around it. But we mentioned earlier that there were, for whatever reasons, Cold War reasons, or being sent up to shoot down UFOs, as the military was instructed to do. That's hard and fast. That's in the record. We got that cold.
Yeah.
But the thing is the treatment of the aviators that were involved with that. Can you imagine sitting on the runway, spinning up your jets, knowing you're getting ready to go out there and engage the complete unknown, and then to go out there and have some kind of difficulty with it, have some kind of problem in the hostility, and crash, and have your memory written off later on if you're alluded to at all as an incompetent, didn't know what you were doing. Frank can speak to that. This is the stuff that brings tears to your eyes. Is the American fighting man, going out there and ordered to go out there and do that job, and then to be dismissed and sullied as a result of it. That's just criminal.
The thing that really, really gets to me, with all the witnesses involved in the Rendlesham Forest case, they've all had their memories messed with. They've all been victims of disinformation campaigns. They've all had their lives destroyed. And even Larry Warren was a 19-year-old kid, and he still gets all of this, not so much now, but, the animosity and the derision. And these people actually were really patriotic, signed up. They had an ideal, and then when all this happens, and then they're treated like that, it's absolutely disgusting.
Hey, it happens in the corporate world. It doesn't matter where it's at. The grunts in the field, they are just meat for the grinder, I guess is a good way to say it. It doesn't matter whether you're military or corporate or whatever.
Yeah.
If they got to cover something up or they got to point a finger at somebody, they're going to do they're going to do a top job. That's just it's just what people do to each other, and it doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't surprise me.
Hey, well, corporations are people too.
Whatever, Alfred. How dare you on our first show bring that up?
But I'll tell you, like when you think about the memories of these people, and Frank writes in the Flatwoods Monster book about this, these two, the pilot and the navigator, that the official word back to the family is bupkis, and it's changed, and it's not based in fact, and it's insulting, and don't know what the hell's going on. You can't treat a soldier and his family like that and expect to get away with it forever.
Yeah,
Frank, are you still there?
Yeah. And that particular night, I came onto a story that was based out of Florida, and it was over the Gulf of Mexico, and there was an F-94B Starfire out of Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City that vanished off the face of the earth while being tracked on several different radars right over the Gulf of Mexico. This was within that 21-and-a-half-hour period. This was just before the Flatwoods crap hit the fan. This jet just vanished. When I started researching this incident years ago, I found out that there was no record on the planet Earth of these men ever being in the Air Force, being alive, being dead. There was no Social Security death index. There was absolutely nothing to do with these two pilots. It was the radar operator and the pilot of the jet.
But here's the rest of the story. Go, Frank.
I started looking into it and got hold of the Air Force, and they had no record of this incident. Nothing whatsoever. I started contacting Maxwell Air Force Base, National Archives. I was calling everybody, and I got the big circle jerk run around for years and years and years. Well, I finally was able to track down the surviving brothers of each one of these missing pilots. and John Jones Jr. lived in Sanford, and which is about a half an hour from where I live here in Daytona. And I talked to the brother on the phone, and he said, let me see what I could find for you. Well, he actually went into the attic, and he found the original Air Defense Command documents from General Benjamin Chidlaw that were sent to him, talking about his brother's disappearance. And what is interesting about this whole thing, the family wasn't even notified until about 3 days later that the next of kin was gone, which was kind of funny right there in itself. He mailed me all of the documents, and I started piecing together the documents. They were from Chidlaw. There was one from Tyndall Air Force Base commander. And basically, to put it in a nutshell, I had all the Air Force press release articles in the newspapers throughout the state. I had Western Union telegrams from Chidlaw to the family, and I started piecing all this stuff together, and nothing matched. There were two different sets of stories. There were blatant lies. There was a bunch of crap going on here. There was no record, any recordings whatsoever of this incident happening, and I have the documents from the United States Air Force stating they have no record. Back at that point, when the first book came out, there was no record of it. And the interim, the documents of the accident, aircraft accident report from Norton Air Force Base was released. So Stanton Friedman actually got this 68-page report for me, and it was cut up and dissected into pieces. It kind of looked like my first book, Alfred, what the publisher did to it. You could tell it was really hacked. And this whole story was an abortion. The Western Union telegrams to the family were different from what was released in the press, from all the newspaper articles, and now I have a 68-page report, and it's telling a different story. Stanton Friedman was able to find pieces of this report separated in National Archives that never hit it onto microfilm. So this thing was definitely edited. The report was so bad, this aircraft accident report, I started going through it, and I spent a couple of years just on the 68 pages, and I deciphered every piece of information out of there. The Air Force actually has 3 different times, official times, that the jet vanished, which is disgusting. 3 different times. They didn't know their ass from a hole in the ground or what was going on. They were scrambling around trying to cover this story up, and it happened so fast they had to put something out, and nothing made sense. There was a couple meetings that were called together, and this is all in the new book, and all with new maps and everything. But the whole thing was an abortion. It was covered up very poorly. They had to cover this thing up so quick, nothing made sense. One hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. What I did is I reenacted the whole thing step by step by step by step, once again by using the map and working with pilots, military people. We reenacted this whole scene of what happened. And it actually, what Alfred said, it's a crying shame. These guys were involved in this crazy story, and they were just written off as being incompetent. And it's very sad. And it really is disgusting of what happened. So this happened on the same night as the Flatwoods incident. And what was amazing, when Stanton Friedman got me the microfilm reel for September 12, 1952, for the reports for these accidents, the Jones and Del Curto case was there. The case before it and the case after it were gone. I thought I was hallucinating when I first sat down. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is near my home here, and I sat down and I put this microfilm, and it went case number 1, 2, 4, and 6. And I'm like, I wasn't spinning the film that goddamn fast. And I went back and I'm like, where's the other cases? And I immediately got on the phone. I called Stanton. I said, Stanton, something funny's going on here.
Yeah.
The Jones and Del Curto case is here. I said, but the cases before and after were yanked and sent to higher classification. And he says, Frank, I wonder what the hell else they're covering up. So, and then I spent a couple of years going through and dissecting out what actually had happened. And like I said, 3 different times the jet vanished. It was really a massive cover-up on the part of the Air Force and all the guys that were in the tower who were said to be controlling the jet that night when it disappeared. And to this day, the jet has never been found. The airmen are gone. Not one shred of evidence. And it has not been explained in a sane manner. The story is completely insane. And actually, the pilot's brother, who I had been keeping in touch with, he was so sick over this story, he didn't even want to hear anything, because as I started pulling out more inconsistencies, he was getting more disgusted over it.
Yeah, and what can you do? You can't fight a machine that big, can you?
You're right. And he told me that him and his sister, this was the kid brother, he said every time something came on the news here in Florida where they found a plane or a jet off the coast, they would call each other up and get all hyped up, and our kid brother was never found, and it's just very heartbreaking to hear all of this of what actually happened.
Yet again, the sort of similarity to Rendlesham, there was a UFO sighting allegedly just before it happened, and it was picked up on radar, and there was a big hoo-ha that these people had come to pick up the radar tapes and that something had been caught on radar that weekend. There was all these rumours of things falling in the forest, things falling in the sea, all these looking for things, and what had actually happened was Bay-10s had crashed on a training exercise. The pilots ejected, one landed in the sea, one landed in the forest. The one in the sea got carried out to sea by his parachute, and the RAF rescue, one of the RAF rescue operators, he got the winch snapped, and so basically 2 pilots died, but that was quite happily relegated to UFO folklore. And there's no recognition for them. I've found one newspaper article about all of it, and the only way I found it was looking through ejection histories, which I do when there's ever there's been a UFO crash. I look into, alleged UFO crash. I look into the ejection history because, that's all out, with even the manufacturer of the seat itself. So, I think that's really sad. But this is a standard thing that they do. That they'll use the UFO thing as a find everybody, because then everything's UFO, so you can't differentiate between what's not and what is, so then you can say, well, none of it is because it's all military, or all of it is because it's all UFOs, when in actual fact it's a fantastic smokescreen for even UFO sighting, So, because who believes it? Not many people believe it. Everyone's in 2 minds about it all the time. So you throw that as a scattergun over everything, then it's a win-win situation for them.
Yeah, do we have a few more minutes on the air?
As long as you want.
Okay. I'm going to bring something up here, and this is kind of upsetting. In this particular case here with Jones and Del Curto, with the fellows who disappeared on the night when all of this flap was going on in West Virginia, they were down in Florida when everything was going on. What happened is, through these 68 pages of documents, I went through and I pulled and dissected them to death. What happened is there was 2 board meetings where Air Force officials came in from Norton Air Force Base to Tyndall Air Force Base. They sat down and they interviewed all the people in the control tower, the guy who was in charge of the flight, the approach officer, everybody that was involved. And it was a half-ass interview. It was covered up so bad. What I did is the board meetings, there was actually 2 of them, the original one, the follow-up one, and then I went through 68 pages and the official statements given by the men in the control towers to the United States Air Force when they were questioned. And it took quite a long time. I went through all page by page, and I pulled out every little quote. This may take a minute or 2, but I'm going to read off, and you, the listeners, can decide for themselves what happened on that night, on that particular night, if the Air Force was covering the story up. I'm going to read off the answers given by the men in the control tower who were in charge of the 794B at the time they were being questioned, and here's their answers and what we're given in their official.
Yeah, the official inquiry, and these are their answers.
Okay. Talk about being evasive. Okay, here we go. It's going to take a minute or two. At that time, at about this time, at this time, about this time, after this time, about that time, at that time, well, about this time, it was at that time, at one time, I cannot remember exactly. At one time, we found him where he was. That sounds like a Yogi Berra answer. I don't know. I don't remember. I cannot remember exactly. And here's another one. This is
now. These are the guys in the tower. These are the guys who were supposed to know what the hell's going on. I mean, at all times, man. It's just crazy. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, and here we go. Here's the rest of them. Not that I remember. There must have been. I can't be sure. I would say it must have been around. No, not to my knowledge. It happened sometime later. At this time, no, sir, I do not remember. I am not sure. I could not say, not to my knowledge. I am not certain. I am unable to say. This was the control tower. These were the men who were in charge of this aircraft when it disappeared.
That is just absolutely mind-blowing. That you just
not
speechless,
one of them knew
you know.
at the time. Not a single person was able to tell you what time.
Yeah,
it was.
I mean, can you imagine a 747 crashing in the middle of New York City, and those are the answers that they're getting from the tower who's supposed to be controlling the flight.
Thursday.
They'd be in jail, man. I mean, for incompetence or whatever. You know.
Yeah, there was something going on. There was something afoot. There was some kind of weirdness that I'm sure it would really be interesting to get to the bottom of it.
Definitely. I mean, when did Janet come in? I mean, that was the kind of like, shut up, don't say anything. This is what happened. Sign it. You know, what do we know what year that was? Because I can't remember.
I don't recall myself.
Yeah, so that gives you an idea of what was going on that night. And the sad part about this whole case is it was blamed on pilot error. The original blame went on the control tower, and then it was overruled by higher authority, Alfred. And when the final ruling came down after the overturned answer, Tyndall Air Force Base Tower Control personnel were cleared of all charges. And the case was swung back, and everything hit the pilots, and it was blamed on pilot error. Yes.
Have you tried to contact any of the actual people involved in the incident, like air traffic controller? Maybe they were still alive or something.
I had trouble tracking them down. Maybe somebody out there that reads my book could further it a little bit. It wasn't easy. Seems most of these guys are dead because this happened so long ago. But if somebody reads the book, you can call Stanton Friedman, myself, or get hold of Alfred, because we're always open to further investigation. And like I said, the document was 68 pages long, and it was dissected to pieces. And here is a very interesting point. Out of the 68-page report, there is not one word about the participation of the radar operator who was sitting in the back seat. Isn't that interesting, Alfred? Not one goddamn word about Del Curto. And he was the radar operator in charge of that jet. Why was there nothing ever brought up about him? Everything got blamed on the pilot. The Air Force never answered why there was never anything written up about the radar observer, which is a key person who's involved in the jet. That's why he's back there.
It's a three-tiered system, isn't it? You've got your radar, you've got your pilot, and you've got the guy in the watchtower. I mean, your radar operator. So, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, if you have a radar operator and you blame it on him, you have a body to manage.
Yeah.
You know, you can blame it on the pilot and everything like that. The pilot's gone, the plane's gone, and you don't. It's done. You can just write whatever you want, and everybody moves on.
And if the radar operator speaks at that point in time, he'd be gone too. You know.
You know, you have to remember too that a lot of the aircraft accidents that were going on during this shoot them down period were situations like entire flights of 4 all running out of gas at the same time.
Wow.
Right? That's the excuse. That's the explanation. Yeah. And man, I'm a military aviator. I know my way around a freaking gas tank, and I'm here to tell you that 4 aircraft in a flight are not going to run out of fuel at exactly the same time.
And how can a fuel issue be pilot error?
Yeah, and several of these accidents, too, Alfred, we can really stress on this, that were going on during that period, were decorated war heroes from World War II and Korea.
Yeah.
They're coming back home after hundreds of combat missions, and they're taking off on a routine training mission. And
you don't exactly, and you don't put your flakes in charge of your state of the art aircraft.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly the same with the UFOs and nukes, isn't it? I mean, this is the one thing that I keep saying. These people are credible because they were absolutely psychologically evaluated to the nth degree, because they were left in charge of either blowing up the world or not, you know. So you cannot discredit a person after they've been through that kind of scrutiny.
Yeah, in fact, that's just exactly like Jesse Marcel, isn't it, who was chosen among probably hundreds to be the top kick intelligence officer for the only outfit capable of dropping the atomic bomb. Yeah. And later on, we want to call him a fool and a goof because, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing.
And then for that to follow on into his son, you know, that is real kind of dedication, isn't it, into discreditation, whereas in most situations, if the parent has died and the child carries on the story for whatever plight it might be, there's always credibility in that because somebody else really believes them that much. So, you know, and I met Jesse, 2006, 2008 maybe, and you know what? I absolutely believe the man 100%. So, you know,
Frank and I were with him in Kansas in was it last year, Frank? Year before last?
Yeah, last March, Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah.
Yep, last March.
A great, grand old man.
Yeah, he's fabulous. He's really lovely, though. I mean, I'm not just brown nosing. He's really nice.
No, he was a great guy. He's a great guy. Hugely accomplished. And, you know, for your basic flying saucer wacko, the guy's a military flight surgeon. He just knows what he's doing. He knows where he's at.
Yeah, as they all do. So we should give them more credit. So we've got about 20-odd minutes left. Concluding the Flatwoods Monster. What was it?
I don't think I got your question there, Sasha.
Yeah. So what happened when the military finally showed up?
What happened is Colonel Levitt told me he was contacted by the Air Force. He got a call out of Washington. And remember earlier I said that there were several UFOs seen over the Braxton County area. What had happened is there were 2 damaged ships that came into the area. One crashed outside of Flatwoods, a few miles down the road along the Elk River in an area called Sugar Creek. We have the Flatwoods Monster incident that occurred on the Bailey Fisher farm in Flatwoods with Mrs. May and all the kids. Levitt was told to take his troops and set up and go look. They were told it was an airplane, a crashed airplane. The locals saw this thing crash, and it wasn't there. They didn't find anything. The sheriff was out there earlier looking for it. Colonel Levitt was there with the West Virginia National Guard. In Sugar Creek, he set up 180 troops. At that point, once he set his troops up, he took he told me 50 to 60 men into Flatwoods, into the center of the state, and they came in on a covert operation. They did not go up through the middle of the town. They came up there with their army trucks through the back logging road, parked way the hell out in the back of the property, the northern part of the property, and they came up over the backside of the hill. Levitt told me he was told to get samples from the area. I interviewed him with a camera in front of his face for about an hour. Out of that hour, he told me about 40, 45 minutes of stuff involved with the Flatwoods case. He grabs the samples of leaves off of the tree where the monster was seen. He found bits of this little black plastic-like material, and what was found predominantly across the farm was this thick oil that was strewn all over the place. This was the oil that splattered out and hit Mrs. May in the front of her uniform. This oil also covered through the farm where the craft was parked out in the gully of the farm. There was actually two paths cut through the high grass. Ailey Stewart Jr., who was the reporter, he was actually the Johnny on the Spot guy who was up there. Saw Mrs. May and the kids right after this happened. He went up to the farm. He saw the track marks. He told me he was there the next day when the sun came up. And what he saw was this big track, approximately 4 foot wide, cut through the grass. He said it looked like a gigantic leaf blower, 4 foot wide, if you had walked with it, coming from the area where the craft had touched down. It left a mark, and there was one track going up towards the tree, and there was another one going back. It was basically the footprints of it coming back and forth. He said there were stones and rocks blown over from the force. That's the propulsion system of this thing as it hovered across the farm. Levitt found oil strewn all through the tracks. He found oil up by the tree, and he took samples of this oil, and he actually sent it out. He told me he shipped it off. All this stuff was sent off to Washington. And I asked Levitt, I said, how long were you on this spot? He said he was just on the spot for about 45 minutes. He said, but his troops stayed there overnight. And I was kind of shocked during the interview. I said, they did? They stayed there overnight? He said, yes. The Air Force wanted to stay overnight in case something else happened. So the Air Force knew something went on. There was a reason that Levitt was called into the area, and the reason was the United States Air Force knew they had shot down UFOs, and it was just a matter of time. They knew that there was going to be a report where they were going down, and this one went down in Flatwoods. And it was Flatwoods is, if you look at the map, it is exactly 200 miles west on a beeline across from Washington. And that's a key point. It landed on the Bailey Fisher farm at the dead center point of the state. And an important part here is if you look at my master map, West Virginia is void of military Air Force bases. There are no bases in West Virginia. This thing landed dead in the center of the state. An important part here is the area where it landed. Years ago, I met a witness who actually saw the craft come in. He was not with the boys. He was an adult at the time, Jack Davis. Jack was at another point of another part of the town in this point, and he saw the craft coming in from a different point of view. He is the one that gave me the close description of how big it was. He said it was around 32 feet long and about half as tall, and it looked like a big egg. And he saw this thing come in and touch down, and he said it was glowing behind the trees. And after it touched down, it actually relocated into the gully of the farm. Well, an interesting point is Jack was driving me around in the early part of my research throughout different points to get me familiar with the area. Well, Jack drove me up to this point a couple miles or so away from Flatwoods. We drove up through the mountains. I had no idea where the hell I was. And I'm like, Jack, where are we going? He's just like, be quiet and just sit there. I'm going to show you something. So a few minutes later, we pull the car over on the side of the road. We're at a point where it's higher than the Fisher farm. We walk out across this field, and he says, Frank, look straight out over there to your right. And he says, what do you see? I says, I see a million goddamn trees. And he says, no, look right in the middle. What do you see? I said, there's a big clearing area out there. And it looked like a bald spot on the top of a man's head. He said, that's where the ship landed that night. He says, how strategic, huh? It just happened to be a meteor, as was said. That thing landed right in the middle of the mountains at the only cleared area right on the Fisher farm. And when I stood back, I couldn't believe it. I says, oh, my gosh, Jack, look at that. It came in and made a controlled landing and touched down right in the middle of the forest at the high point of the property. Alfred was up there at that particular point in the back part of the farm.
Yeah, and, you know, I got to tell you what a real enchanting thing it is to have happen, to get people who have already impressed you as being sincere and with it, to take you through exactly where they were when what happened to them happened so long ago and was so crazy. It just really, I don't know, it really affects you on a visceral level that you really can't get just reading the book, you know?
Yeah.
Usually when you're researching a UFO case or something like that, you're going through paperwork and that sort of thing. You know, you don't have a whole group of people taking you and feeding you fried chicken and taking you up to the what I mean.
It wasn't that easy at the beginning, guys.
Yeah,
it wasn't that easy at the beginning. When I first started going into town there, they're like, boy, what are you doing in town? We don't talk about the Flatwoods Monster around here no more. And they'd flip the jacket open. They'd have a, gun.
Yeah, right up. Right up to the point. Yeah, I don't think Frank's going to tell you this, but right up to that point of pushing him in the chest and saying, "Come here."
I'm the outsider, and here I am. Once I moved down to Florida and started going to film school. I'm walking around with gigantic tripods and cameras and cases and equipment. And I remember one particular time I walked into Sutton, which is the county seat, just outside of Flatwoods. It's the town. And I walked in with my buddy, and I had this big, gigantic 325 high-8 camera, in like a 3.5-foot long box, and I set it down in a restaurant during lunch hour, and it was just like a scene from a movie, Alfred. And the hustle and bustle, you hear the forks and spoons clanging, and I walked in and sat down with my buddy, and everybody in there looks over at me. And it was like the whole place got quiet within 2 seconds.
I'm going to have to step away from the phone here for a minute, guys. My apologies.
Okay. Is everybody else on?
Yeah, we're all here. Carry on.
Yeah, and so, this is the early part of my investigation. There's like 50, 60 people in there, all turn over and look at me, and they stop.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
the piano stopped playing and the dog.
I don't think I'm wanted here, so.
Yeah.
But what happened is when I started working closer with the witnesses, they started opening up and telling me a little bit more, and before you know it, the people that were standoffish towards me, they would introduce me to other people, and then I would go over their homes and end up spending hours on end, and I was showing them the documentation. With Mrs. May, what had happened, she was interviewed a million times within the first few weeks after this occurred. Kathleen said that the reporters would come to her and they would ask her, oh, can I borrow this magazine article you were in, or can I borrow this or borrow that? And they ended up taking all this stuff, and they took just about everything away from her and never returned it. I have probably every article on Earth and every piece of information about the Flatwoods Monster case. And as I started obtaining this stuff, I started making copies and giving them to the family, to the May family. And so it was a good relationship working with them. And I interviewed these people in depth for hours and hours and years on end. This wasn't one little interview where I sat down with them and that was the end of it. I was going over their houses numerous times and sitting down and doing the sketches, like I mentioned earlier with this monster to figure out what the heck this thing was. what I started piecing this together was there was another incident that happened. Are you familiar with the Snitowski incident, the Frametown incident?
No, okay. I'm not.
Well, what happened is when the Flatwoods Monster was sighted that night, when everybody ran back to the house, the second path indicates that it went back to its craft. Well, it had taken off, and it was actually seen by witnesses to fly along the Elk River, and it was flying over roads, and it ended up crashing about 17 miles away in an area called James Knoll or James Knob, and this was Frametown. Well, what happened is there was an incident that happened on the following night. About the same time, the Flatwoods Monster incident happened about 8 o'clock, their local time. 8 o'clock the next night, there was a couple from New York. They were had went into Ohio to visit some relatives on vacation, and on the way back to Queens, New York, they had went through some back roads. They had not realized what had happened in Flatwoods the night before. They were driving through the area of Frametown, and George Snitowski, whom I tracked down, and I talked to him years ago, and I have an article where he was interviewed in the 50s, and I found out what happened on this particular night. Snitowski's driving along with his car on the side of the road, and it suddenly stalled. He's about 17 miles away from where Flatwoods, where the incident happened. His car stalled. He got out of the car. His wife was sitting in the passenger seat. The baby was in the back seat in the crib. They had no portable baby seats then. The baby was in the crib in the back. George gets out, and he thought a chemical factory was on fire. He smelled the same sulfur and burning smell that was noticed on the farm the night before. He has no idea what's going on. He looks out into the woods of Frametown along the edge of the road, and he sees this gigantic ovoid-shaped object that's purple and glowing, and it's shifting up and down like it's hovering. It's just slightly moving. He starts walking towards it, and he starts gagging because the area is starting to fill with this smoke, and it's a sulfur. Same exact thing that was noted in Flatwoods the night before. He starts moving towards this ovoid UFO sitting out in the woods and hovering in the woods, and as he starts getting closer to it, he starts noticing this electrical shock going through his body. It's low voltage shock, and as he starts moving towards it, it really starts irritating him, and the area is starting to get filled up with this sulfurous smoke, and he starts gagging. He actually dropped down to one knee and started vomiting all over the place. He was very uncomfortable. He turned around and started heading back towards the car. En route to going back towards the vehicle, his wife starts screaming like a banshee. She is hysterical. And I liken this, when I talked to George, she was screaming like Fay Ray when she saw King Kong on Skull Island. She was screaming her brains out, and she yelled to George, "Look, hurry up, George, look behind you. It's behind you." George turned around and along the border of the woods coming out towards the street where the vehicle was, it's following him, and it was a 9-foot-tall figure that was hovering and coming in his direction. This thing had the lower portion of the body was one solid mass, similar to the Flatwoods Monster, except the upper portion of the suit was removed. George Snitowski actually saw the Flatwoods Monster standing in its spacesuit with the upper torso, helmet, and the upper helmet removed, and it was moving towards him. He was hysterical. He was fumbling all over the place. This thing is moving towards him. The thing basically looked like a snake reptilian creature. He said it had a bloated body. It was a good 9 foot tall, and it was hovering. The lower portion was one big mass, and it was emitting this sulfur smell. This is the same description given in Flatwoods, except this suit of armor, if you want to call it a suit of armor, which basically it was a spacesuit covering. The upper portion was gone. He saw this thing look like a reptilian with a big head, and it had a big bloated body with long, spindly, disjointed arms. Now here's the scary part. He said it only had 2 long, skinny fingers. It didn't have 4 digits in the thumb. The long, spindly arm came down into forked ends. This thing is hovering and moving towards him, and you could see this on the website. I actually have a couple drawings, and you could see my paintings of this thing, what it looked like. He's running away from this thing. His wife is screaming. The baby's going hysterical, and this smoke of the exhaust is coming through the area, and they're all having trouble breathing. He finally gets back to the car. He fumbles. He gets inside. He rolls the windows up. They grabbed the baby out of the back seat and took the baby, put the baby on the ground, and George pushed his wife onto. Now, this is an early 1950s car. You have to remember there's a lot of room in the front seat, not like our cars today. He dove on top of his wife, and he had a hunting knife, a big blade, hidden inside the glove box. He reached into the glove box, shut it, laid down on top of his family, and he was basically guarding them. It's a male instinct. He's protecting his wife and 18-month-old kid. This thing came towards the car. He was so scared out of its wits, he didn't even want to look up. He was looking down, laying on top of him. This thing actually hovered and circled around the car and was checking it out. When it got towards the front of the car, it stopped. Now the whole area is starting to fill up from this exhaust. This is the same exhaust that Mrs. May and the kids got sick on. He finally got up the nerve, and he looked up over the dashboard, and he must have had a heart attack, because as he looked up over the dashboard, he saw this thing was in front of the car, in front of the bumper, and it was looking down on him. Oh. At that point, I'm surprised he didn't have a heart attack. He said his chest was thumping like a sledgehammer.
Oh, now that's fear.
He looked up at it, and you have to remember, he said this thing was a good 9 feet tall, and it's this reptilian creature looking down. It actually reached across the hood of the car and touched the car with its forked finger. This is when he got a really good close-up of it, and it burned right through into the primer of the paint. The skin actually burned and left an imprint on the hood of his car. The thing backed away from the car, and it took off, and it went and it hovered back across the opening, the pasture area, and it went back in, and it disappeared into the woods. At this point, he's watching it, and the craft that was hovering out in the distance all of a sudden lifted up, cleared the treetops, came out of the woods, and it hovered there, and it started swinging in a pendulum motion. And it went back and forth, and it took off like a rocket and disappeared in a split second. What happened after that, him and his wife got their wits together, and he had the keys in the vehicle, and he turned it, and the vehicle went on. And he drove into a nearby town, and he went to a nearby truck stop. And the one interesting point about this story is that when this thing happened, unless you were in the immediate area of Flatwoods, you didn't know what had happened 17 miles away, because the Flatwoods Monster story didn't hit the press until the Daily Mail's article on Sunday, which was the following day. Yeah. So I pieced this whole story together. So the Flatwoods Monster craft landed in Frametown. It actually stayed overnight. And the interesting part here is when I started doing my composite drawings and doing all my sketches, the Flatwoods Monster was said to be somewhere near 12 foot tall. If you take the spacesuit, and I have tons of illustrations in the new book, If you take and put the upper suit back on and put this gigantic hood covering over the top of it,
yeah,
you have 12
gives it more height. Yeah,
gives it more height, exactly. So you have a 9. He said it was a quote, good 9 foot tall, and then you put the top of it. There's your nearly 12 foot tall monster. So this is what I was able to piece together. The Flatwoods Monster craft is the only craft that did not have an extended flight path. All the other crafts were able to leave out of the United States. They left out over the East Coast. This was the only one that stayed there overnight, and it was picked up.
And it was also seen the next day by somebody who saw what was within it, so that we can't say that it was some kind of either American or Russian, test flight of some kind of equipment, because I know that the Russians are quite fond of firing people up in little tin cans into space, and there were a lot of people burned up in the atmosphere, so they weren't really particularly bothered about the person within it. So one of the things that I thought was maybe initially was that maybe there was somebody within it, because the leathery skin covering, the red thing that I've read some description of it. It reminded me of what maybe a racing car driver would wear under the helmet. Mm-hmm. So I mean, but something having an arm.
Well, whatever it was, it commanded the presence of a heavy battalion of American military, and and it also that it happened during the biggest UFO flap in United States history. So
it's the second account that really, for me, lends it more validity, because the description of the thing, the forked fingers.
Yeah. And
it's the next night, and there was no possible way that he could have known about anything that had gone on the night before. That, to me, actually makes it sort of,
Yeah, because it didn't hit the press, and it just hit the Charleston Daily Mail on the Sunday edition, but it didn't hit the major news lines and the media until Monday. And it's interesting to point out, in the original descriptions of the monster, the so-called monster, it was described as looking like a mechanical man, which was or a suit of armor. It was described as having a suit of armor. One of the key points here, too, is the nickname of the Green Monster. And the reason that it was called the Green Monster is because it was like an aluminum silverish color, and it reflected the environment around it. Like, if anybody remembers chrome on the old cars, it would reflect the outside environment.
It's something that I've just thought, actually, which I find is interesting. The first descriptions, and the depiction was with the long, scary arms, but it's still had the helmet and the cowl. Mm-hmm. The fact that the next night this person has seen the whatever's within it, and it has actually got quite long, scary arms, I think that's quite interesting.
And the key thing that Freddie May brought up to me, he said that this thing was mechanical. It looked like a suit of armor.
Yeah. So in both cases, even though after the drawings that you've done where the arms actually could be described as antennas, some description has been that this thing has got long, scary arms. The next night, it's not got its top on, and it's got long, scary arms and not antennas. I think.
Yeah, but they were forked fingers. He distinctly said forked fingers. And it was interesting.
But how things can sort of get bent out of shape a little bit.
Yeah.
In recollection. I mean, I'm not saying it's identical. I'm just saying it's similar enough to make me think, that there's something to that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how it was said to have burnt the paint of the car right down to the primer. And when I had told this point to Stan Friedman years ago, he said, well, Frank, there's certain animals within the animal kingdom, some reptiles and frogs and whatnot, where they actually have acid in there. I don't know. I'm not a biologist, but Stan brought this up real quick, that actually emit acids, and they could burn. So can you imagine something?
Yeah. And then we've got the alien films as well.
You know,
a little bit later. You know,
so you got to get stuck in something's mouth. You know, you can make it very unpleasant. You know, that's how.
Absolutely.
But you see, even back then, they were able to manipulate people's memory. So even, it's like when you look at Rendlesham, you can tell that there's like 4, maybe 5 people who've been interfered with, and they all were at the same place at the same time and all have a different recollection. It's not difficult to slightly fudge a memory, just so it differs enough from another person's to make all of them, sort of unreliable, if you like. So I don't know. Maybe some of them were made to remember different things. Maybe they did see that it had long. I don't know, but I think that the fact that there is a drawing of this thing that has long arms from the first night, and the second night it seemed to have the long arms. I think there's something to that. Personally, I'd have to have a think about that one. I'm not telling you to. I'm just saying because you probably have. But
it's peculiar.
So Alfred,
it intrigued me.
Where'd you go?
Who?
So Alfred, where'd you go? You have to poop? We keep you on the phone?
No. My wife called me, and it was an emergency call, and I was going to tell you guys that I have kind of a family thing going on over here at the moment, and I need to sign off. But I really enjoyed it, and hope to talk to you all again real soon.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Alfred.
Yeah. Thanks, Alfred.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Right, appreciate it myself, and appreciate all you guys, and thank you for what you do, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Bye for now. Ooh.
We're still on?
Yeah, we're still here. Hey, so Frank, what keeps someone motivated to actually do this for 21 years?
It was, at the beginning, I was actually more intrigued, not by the monster story itself. It was when I first started walking around town trying to talk to the locals and seeing the expressions on their faces and basically being told to get lost. We don't talk about this. And I'm like, something's just scared the hell out of these people. Something really happened here. It wasn't the monster as much. It was the way the locals reacted. Very taboo, like, holy shoot, you're talking about the Flatwoods Monster. We don't talk about that here no more. And that was what really intrigued me at first. It was probably that more than the monster case. And I'm like, something must have really happened up here for these people to be acting like this. You have to remember this was over 20 years ago. A lot of these people have since passed on. They was basically first-generation people who actually lived up there during that point. And there was an estimated 10,000 people in between the first 4 to 6 weeks who went up there. Now, you're talking a little town out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. That's a lot of people to go into a town. 300 people with no interstate. It was all back roads and mountain roads. So something happened there. And when I first spoke to Kathleen May, and she told me how it wasn't a monster and the thing looked more mechanical, and it started going from this person to that person. But when I actually interviewed Colonel Levitt at the onset of my investigation, that is what really motivated me to push on, because I had an official military person,
right,
high-ranking official, a colonel from the United States Army who actually spilled his guts to me. I interviewed Levitt twice. The first time I did not tape him. He didn't want me to tape him. But he explained a good chunk of the story, and he told me how he was called by Washington, and he told me a lot of details, and that's when my jaw hit the ground, because it wasn't well known. It was a public fact that Levitt was up there with his troops shortly after the incident for crowd control. And he was up there for weeks with troops because the people were just coming in, and they were just basically destroying the property. You can imagine all the thousands of people coming in a little backwoods town in the middle of nowhere. So they weren't used to this. And the reporters were coming from all over the world, curious people, that's when some of the original investigators, Sanderson and Barker, went up there. So as I started finding out more and getting more leads, it started going on and on and on, and the cold case started to get warmer. until I ended up interviewing quite a few people. And then I got the Project Blue Book documents out, and that's when I saw this thing encompass more than just that little town of Flatwoods. You know,
Okay.
you have stuff going up and down the United States. So it was basically following the breadcrumb trail. I just kept
Right.
going further and further and further. And, you know, then the people would opening up their hearts to me, because I actually vindicated these people. When I go up there, they treat me very well. And they were made fools out of for so many years and laughed at. I heard every hillbilly joke on the planet while I was up there of what these people were called. And it was heartbreaking seeing the way that they were treated by the general public and their own. Some of the people in their own neighborhoods were making fun of them.
Well, do you know
and
what?
This went on
50
for
years
generations.
later, it's still the same. Nothing changes. That is still the same. You know, people still get treated like that when they say whatever they say.
Yeah.
It's
Hey, Frank.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you tell our audience where we can get this great book?
My website is www.flatwoodsmonster.com. And if you click right on there, there's a link, and it will go right to where you can purchase the book. And then if you scroll through on the home page, you could see the area of where it says maps. You could go look at my master maps. The website would take you hours to go through. A lot of my illustrations, artwork, pictures of me with the witnesses. You could see a lot of different stuff on there. And a lot of stuff we talked about tonight will make more sense because there's actual pictures I have of the farm, where the tree is, what the monster looked like. So it'll all pull together.
Yeah, the visual aids always help, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I think it's been an absolutely amazing show, and I've loved every minute of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. And whenever you want to do a repeat show, we could talk a little bit more about it, because there's a lot more.
Yeah,
a lot more to what happened.
Yeah, I do.
And then I will actually have probably about 8 million questions.
Yeah, Frank, because I want to get into the other military stuff and that sort of thing. Other research that you've done, I think, really needs to be heard. And,
yeah.
So, hey, thanks for coming on, man.
Okay, I appreciate it.
We both really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, sir.
Yeah, good luck with your show. And
all right, have a good one.
Okay, good night.
Thank you, Frank.
Alrighty.
All
Good
right,
talking to you. Keep in touch.
Will do, definitely.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Woo!
We are got the first one in the can. I'm about to go ahead and end everything. How you holding up? Holding up all right?
Oh, yeah, it was great. I loved it. And we should say au revoir.
Yes. All right, everybody. Have a good night.